ما حدا بيقدر يساعدنا إذا ما ساعدنا حالنا. رايز تو بلوم نوع النشاطات تتناسب الكل وكل الظروف. اليوم انتم مشاركين بنشاط من نشاطاتنا، استفيدوا كمان من غير برامج معروضة، ونحن على استعداد كمان ننظم نشاطات انتم بتقترحوها. هدف هالبرامج نعرف احتياجاتنا الحقيقية والوسائل يلي بتساعدنا نتحصن ونتقوى. كلنا مسؤولين عن كلنا، يلي منا واقف يسند التعبان. كيف؟ برامج رايز تو بلوم بتدلنا. كلنا متكلين على كلنا الروح الإيجابية والجو الفعال يبقوا مزهرين بجامعتنا. ناطرينكم تشاركوا بكافة النشاطات. Rise your head above the waters, assess your needs, seek help, and bloom. Bloom to help others rise.
Voilà. Merci beaucoup, la Rise to Bloom, la belle Fadi Chedia. Merci pour chacune et chacun de vous. Vous avez été nombreux à participer à cette formation aujourd'hui. Donc, on va prendre juste 2 minutes. Rana va vous mettre un petit lien dans le chat. C'est un petit questionnaire qui nous est demandé par Rise to Bloom. S'il vous plaît, Abou, le questionnaire, si vous cliquez sur le lien et vous le complétez avant de commencer la formation. Le but de ces 2 petits questionnaires, c'est de voir l'impact de chacune de ces actions. Ça vous prend 2 minutes, 3 minutes, et nous sommes obligés de le compléter avant et après la formation. إذا في مشكل، إذا في حدا ما عم يقدر يفوت على اللينك بليز يقلنا.
Bonjour, je viens de me joindre à vous. Est-ce que c'est possible de renvoyer le lien?
Bien sûr.
Merci.
Bonjour tout le monde.
Bonjour.
Bonjour أهلين. رح أسيبكم لكن إذا في مجال قبل ما نبلش، قبل ما أقدم دكتور فيكتور، إذا فيكم تعبوا هذا البري تيست، الكيستيونير الصغير بدقيقتين 3 بده، وبنرجع دغري بنبلش السيشن.
Bonjour tout le monde.
Bonjour. Bonjour Sonia. S'il te plaît, في questionnaire حطيناه على الشاتينج، هذا مطلوب لنا برايز تو بلوم، إذا فينا نعبيه بري وبوست تيست، رح ترجع تحطوا رنا مرة تانية فوالا للأشخاص اللي وصلوا هلا.
Fadi, je n'arrive pas à l'ouvrir.
أنا فتح معي، رح ترجع تحطوا رنا مرة تانية على الشات. Il suffit de cliquer sur le lien ريما.
Il faut copier.
C'est déjà fait, c'est déjà fait. J'ai cliqué sur les deux, la première fois sur le premier lien et la deuxième fois sur le deuxième lien, mais ça n'ouvre pas.
Bon, c'est pas grave.
Copier dans le browser. Copier-coller dans le browser, c'est plus facile.
Tu peux faire
utiliser le mail de l'USJ aussi.
Oui. Ah oui, il faut le mail de l'USJ et il faut coller sur le browser. Bon, je vais introduire entre-temps Dr Victor Araman. Donc, nous avons l'honneur et le plaisir d'accueillir avec nous aujourd'hui professeur Araman. Il est professeur associé de sciences de décision à l'Alayan School of Business à l'IUB. Il est professeur adjoint à STEM, NYU et professeur invité à l'INSEAD depuis 2006. La recherche actuelle de Victor porte sur la prise de décision analytique dans l'incertitude et la publication dans des revues universitaires de premier plan. Victor donne des cours sur la gestion des opérations et de la chaîne d'approvisionnement, les modèles décisionnels et l'analyse des prix, et il est très impliqué dans la formation des cadres. Victor a une vaste expérience professionnelle ayant travaillé avec des dizaines de joueurs allant des startups aux multinationales. Il est titulaire d'un diplôme en génie de l'École centrale de France et d'une maîtrise et d'un doctorat en recherche opérationnelle de l'Université Stanford. Vous savez que la formation se passe en anglais aujourd'hui, mais les questions que vous pouvez poser, vous pouvez les poser dans la langue que vous voulez. Dr Victor est parfaitement trilingue, donc il n'y a aucun problème avec l'anglais ou le français, mais il fera sa présentation et sa formation en anglais. Mais vous pourrez toujours à tout moment poser vos questions dans le chat box en français ou en anglais aussi. Notre webinaire sera très interactif, il y aura des pauses, des exercices, enfin plein d'interactivité. Dr Victor, je vous donne la parole.
Merci Fadi pour l'introduction. Good morning everyone. I'm really thrilled actually to be part of that program. And when Fadi connected with me, I was very happy. This is the first time I'm actually connecting with a prestigious and let's say cousin institution of this of ours. And I was very happy to be actually part of that. Like Fadi said, if you don't mind having your cameras on, it's really appreciated because it's going to make this discussion and session much more interactive. But I understand that you might have some particular constraint and you cannot do it. That's more than fine. The discussion today is going to be around decision making. Now, the word decision making is very, very broad, and there is multiple ways and angles one can approach that. And I basically selected one that hopefully you will find interesting and valuable. Now, we're going to make this discussion also as casual as possible in the sense that I have a few points that I want to share with you, but I'm not stuck to covering all my slides or something like this. I would like to make it as interactive as possible, and we'll do that. However, there are, at some point where I need to progress to make sure that the most important points are passed. Yet I invite you to, interact, ask a clarifying question. If I feel this discussion is taking too much, then I might postpone it for the end of the session. All right. Let me start by asking this. Any of you made an important decision recently that you would like to share with us, the process that you went through? You can use your, on the participation, there is a hand you can raise so that I can see it, but otherwise you can unmute and talk. I don't think there are going to be multiple people talking at the same time, so that should be fine. Anybody would like to share with us recently just a major decision or an important decision, individual or, business, that you made? No pressure, but Fadi, you can also join us with that.
Okay.
No, nobody made decisions recently about, I don't know.
We're actually in the process of
yes, go ahead.
Problem solving before the decision making. We're trying to find the solution before deciding on it.
Find the solution before deciding. Can I understand the context? You will have pre-consulting now.
It's related to our current. Yes, no, it's the current situation. For example, it's mainly the current situation and how to decide on staying in the country or deciding
to leave.
Yes.
You mean, okay. By the way, if you're more comfortable asking the question in French or interacting with French, as Fadi said, please feel free. There is no problem whatsoever. I'll keep it in English because that's just basically more comfortable in terms of being more precise in my answer. And I'll try to answer it possibly.
Moi, par exemple, je suis confronté à une décision à prendre. J'ai été sollicité pour assurer un programme de formation dans une entreprise, tout un programme. Et on ne sait pas, le directeur souhaite qu'on la fasse en présentiel, le début. Et nous ne savons pas quelle décision prendre. Est-ce qu'on attend qu'il y ait un déblocage ou pas? Est-ce qu'on la donne en ligne? Donc, ce genre de décision est très difficile à prendre dans ce contexte.
D'accord. Mais vous l'avez prise ou pas?
On a pris la formation, but we are still thinking about the decision. Will be.
So there are multiple decisions. Obviously, the first one is should you accept that that project. The second one is how to do it, the logistic of it, right, and whether to do it in presentiel or not, right? And what do you think the most difficult issue there?
I think that the most difficult issue is to take a decision and then to realize that we cannot deliver the training.
Right, but I mean, if you take I'm saying if you take one decision, for example, if you do it physical, if you decide to take it physical, what's the issue? What's the problem that you might face?
The problem إذا ضل الكونفينمون ماشي ساعتها ما فينا نكفي فيها مضطرين نرجع نروح أونلاين يعني بده يكون في بلان بي.
Okay, so you have a plan B that goes with the first decision, right? So basically what you're telling me is that the decision is a course of action, not only one, right? And it has to do with uncertainty because, the uncertainty is around whether the lockdown is going to continue or not, right? And there could be also some cost to that because, based on that decision, you might actually allocate some resource one way and you end up basically facing another way and hence you will not be prepared or there will be cost that's not basically was efficiently spent.
Okay. مدام ريما بوجوك رفعت ايدها كمان إذا بتحب.
مين؟ Sorry.
ريما بوجوك.
Okay, I didn't see it. All right. Rima, go ahead, please.
Hello. Talking about decisions and being a financial person leading a hospital, we are currently confronted to take lots of decisions. I'll take one example, changing prices where there's uncertainty and there's floating prices of the currency. And this decision we've taken. Now, the challenges would be how to implement, how to get our partners to stick to it. And there's a lot of uncertainty because the decision is taken based on a projection on the currency, but if the currency will drastically change, then we have to pass to plan B and then to plan C, etc.
Perfectly said, actually. And actually, you will see that the way you put it, Rima, will be echoed in the next few slides in a sense that, all the complexity that you're facing are real and we cannot hide from the complexity when we make a decision just because, our mind cannot handle that complexity. We need to try to face it, yet we can't also just, get lost in that complexity. We need to try to be able to summarize it in a way that is meaningful in order to have some visibility, make some judgment, and take an action. So let me move on in some sense based on this, but these examples I will come back to hopefully as we move on. So basically, I like to say that making decisions is the toughest job of any executive, right? Indeed, that decision can be impacting your career forever, can be impacting other people's career, can be impacting your customer, can be impacting your patient health, your student, your company, basically financial well-being, right? The best ones also, this is an example that I love to use, even though a little bit old by now, Apple introducing the iPhone. And so basically, one doesn't realize that actually when you're building something like the iPhone, that Apple is talking about it in flow. This is where we didn't know about the iPhone. This is 2007. Nobody saw an iPhone before. And basically, Apple went to the world and said, look, it was a very difficult project to manage. I allocated resources wrongly. I made decisions in terms of how much resources the iPhone needs. And now I need to make another decision. And that is either I delay releasing the iPhone or I delay other products I have. For example, the operating system of their, computer, or even what they have something called an Apple TV. And those products, even though so different, Apple has to make decisions on how much resource should be allocated to each one of them. And in fact, they had to delay their other products because they felt that, the iPhone is more important. And so, they made it wrong. They apologized to the world. Their stock market got affected by this. And this is just to say that, things are complex and there are always trade-offs. What's a trade-off is that by winning something, I lose something else. It's extremely, when you are facing a situation where there's a win-win-win, decisions are easy. Decisions are difficult, are interesting when you win, you lose somewhere else, right? And then becomes, what trade-off should I make? And so if I want to be boring and give you definition of a decision is the identification and commitment of a course of action. And I like this definition because it highlights the fact that it's about an identification. There's an exercise of investigation happening in the decision. Of course, we go shopping sometimes and we are impulse buyers, we call this in business, meaning that I love this bag and I end up buying it, right? I didn't think too much. I went emotional, I went whatever. I don't feel, I'm a little bit depressed today, or, I love that color. It made me happy. I didn't think too much. And that's a decision to purchase, right? But beyond impulse, a decision is an invitation for you to identify issues, alternatives, and then commit to an action. Okay, that's a boring definition. Let's take some examples. And I picked my examples especially so that we cover the entire arena, and so that you realize that we're talking about is very broad. So, for example, you come late to a plenary talk. This is the time where things were happening physical, and the talk had started. There's a very famous person talking, and you need to sit. Where should you sit? Now you will say, oh yeah, just pick a seat and sit. That's a boring decision. No, it's not that much, right? Because if you really care about the talk and you know that the speaker doesn't speak loud, you might want to go in the front. However, you might also want to be networking with other people. That's an opportunity to see these other, people in your field and network with them. And so maybe sitting next to those guys is more careful. Maybe you need to leave in 30 minutes. And so sitting will depend on that you need to leave. You don't want to bother other people. And so you're going to sit maybe next to the door or something like this. And then we can continue. So that decision is not necessarily that of something. More interestingly, probably, you're a doctor and you're treating a patient. And now this patient has some serious yet blurry symptoms. How should you treat this person or this patient? Right? And then we're going to talk, I'll come back to that example. Should you do a surgery, medication, and so on. You're a president of an institution. How should you set the tuition increase? And that comes back to Rima's point, right? She was talking about a hospital, but same thing with the institution. And both our institutions went through that process. How should you set the tuition increase in a new environment? You are producing an atypical movie. How should you distribute it? Right? And I have in mind, you can sell it to, NBC. You can, in fact, sell it on, through some different movie theaters in one country. You can go regional, you can go worldwide. You are an individual with limited resources, and you're considering whether you should purchase an apartment. Now, of course, we are in a disastrous economic situation. Probably that's happening less these days than before, but we went through these times, and I'm sure you remember, where all of us wondered whether, we should purchase or not if we didn't have yet. I'm gonna show you a short video by a person that I get to learn or read about, Robert Rubin, who's an incredibly impressive person, mind-wise. He's eventually became a banking executive, top banking executive, lawyer, but also was a former U.S. Treasury Secretary of Treasury during Clinton's time. And this video that you're going to be listening to is, in fact, he was talking to prisoners in one prison in the US about decision making. He actually gave a similar speech, and I will show you only an extract of it a little bit later, to Harvard students graduating. And he was telling them about decision making as well. If you cannot hear, you let me know, but it should be already tested.
I'd like to start by taking a step back, a long step back. I took a course when I was in college, Philosophy 1, taught by a rumpled Greek professor, Raphael Demos. Professor Demos used to amble into his classroom. He would take the waste paper basket, turn it upside down, and use the bottom of the waste paper basket as his lectern. Then he would dissect the great thinkers and philosophers of the ages. In lecture after lecture, his course was designed to lead us to one broad conclusion. Nothing, absolutely nothing, can be proven with absolute certainty. Every system of thought ultimately rests on an assumption or a statement of faith. And if nothing can be proven with certainty, then all decisions are about probabilities. When I make a decision, and this was true when I was in government, it was true when I was in the private sector before that, I would first think of the possible courses of action. Then I would make judgments as best I could about what I thought the odds were of potential outcomes from each possible course of action. And finally, I'd weigh those judgments against each other to reach the best conclusion. And very often what I would do is I would take a yellow pad and I would go through these steps on a piece of paper in order to have more rigor and precision. Having said that, ultimately these are all judgments, judgments about probabilities and judgments about odds. I had a skeptical mindset before I took Professor Demos' course. But his class, his course, gave me an intellectual framework which has guided my thinking and my decision-making ever since. To give you one example, when I became Secretary of the Treasury, one of the first things we did was to set up an Office of Community Development to focus on poverty in inner cities and in distressed rural areas. Shortly afterwards, I received a request, not a request, a demand, an instruction from a senior senator on the Hill to come to his office. He was concerned that I was focusing on community development and not on what he called my job, economic policy. I respectfully disagreed and told him that poverty is a critical economic issue. I said that because I looked at poverty.
So let me say here one thing. What he's going to say now is interesting because we might miss that point. Basically, the senator is telling him, why are you working on poverty? You're responsible of economic policy, right? And of course, for us sitting here, we might think, yes, obviously they're related. And, this maybe American guy doesn't understand that, the senator. No, basically saying the senator is questioning that, what he's doing is because he's saying, look, you're responsible of creating growth. Other people maybe are responsible of improving poverty while you're actually working on that, right? Maybe other NGOs or other governmental, offices are working on poverty. You should be working on the economic growth, entrepreneurship, industrial, and so on. Why are you focusing on poverty? So it's indeed a subtle question that he asked him that could look not as much.
From the perspective of economic probabilities. That is, I looked at the probable economic benefits of measures to combat poverty, the savings that could be had, and the benefits, the productivity benefits that could be obtained by our entire society by enabling the poor to function more effectively in the American workforce. Then I compared the cost to the benefits. My conclusion was that the benefits of combating poverty would far outweigh the costs, that the measures were good and important public investments, and that combating poverty should be part of the nation's growth agenda. To get back to the conference call we had a few months ago, or a couple of months ago, I guess it was, one of the most powerful takeaways was when one of you said, and I'm paraphrasing, when something happens or we are considering some action, we should not react, but instead we should respond. Reacting, he said, is emotional and impulsive. Responding is waiting and taking time to be thoughtful. And that distinction between reacting and responding matches with my earlier discussion. Because if you respond thoughtfully, what you're doing is you're taking the time to think through the odds or the probabilities of different outcomes from different courses of action. Reacting emotionally is the opposite of that. One of you told me that 28 of you discussed reacting versus responding and realized that together you had already been incarcerated for 715 years for 4 minutes and 26 seconds of reacting.
I hope you got the last point. I think it's quite interesting. He was saying, you know, he's talking to prisoners, and that's what I think is amazing in this. And basically he's telling them, some of you, he talked to the prisoners, and some of you told me that a bunch of us have reacted, right, instead of responding, and reacted basically by doing whatever the crime or the, that they did. And this lasted for 4 minutes, whatever they did. However, the cost of that was, in hundreds of years of incarceration when you sum everything. So, reacting instead of responding and thinking and looking at the odds can be extremely expensive. And that's an extreme case, I think you would all agree with me. But what I, again, love the fact that he was talking about, with prisoners, yet decisions for him is not only just using the word at a high level, let's think, let's be, let's count to the 10. He's saying use probabilities, check your options, and so on. It's part of this person's DNA, and it's really speech after speech that I listen to him. It's basically part of how he behaves, and that's why I was sharing this. I'm sharing this with you here. So let me try to visualize decision making in a broader sense. So basically, we have data. The data can be our memories of the last experience we have in this particular setup. It could be on a personal level. We went to Zara and the price of this shirt was something. Or it could be that we're forecasting the demand for students for the next fall, and we have data on that, right? So data is available to some extent to us, whether written in a report or in our mind. Today, we talk also about big data, right? So this kind of incredible amount of data available from finance to consumers, retail, and so on and so forth. However, there's a difference between data and information. Data is data points on traffic, on finance stocks, on students, and so on. And you need to basically turn this into an information, and that exercise is important. You can do it in your mind, and there are also tools that can help you do that. You're trying to describe the data in a meaningful way, or predict, like in forecasting and estimating a particular outcome. We're still not in the action. This is preparing the action, because once you have, and I put in brackets machine learning, we hear all these buzzwords today, and really machine learning is this also exercise of helping you going from data to information, or artificial intelligence to some extent. We can go from information now to the world of action. And that's what I'm focusing on. Right? We're focusing on, so I'm differentiating between description, prediction, and prescription. I'm prescribing, which is the action and the decision. Okay. Hopefully, I'm doing the right decision. What right means is the elephant in the room, right? Everything in this is in this right one. And there's, like also Ruben mentioned, earlier, there's a judgment, right? We need to make judgment all over the place. This is not to automate and robotize decision making. This is not what we're preaching here. Right? This is a human also exercise, yet that is as meaningful and scientific as possible, depending also on the situation, whether you're buying an apartment, sitting, or in a plenary talk, or developing or distributing a movie, or pricing, right? Every setup will depend how much accuracy and data and time you have to come up with that set of actions. Okay, so I want you to visualize this, and that's our focus, is to go from information to the action. Now, one word on right, again, feel free to ask me any clarifying question, and I'll try to manage the time to make sure we get the main points. I want to just mention this. I find it an extremely interesting quote by Alfred Sloan. Alfred Sloan is a huge name in business, in operations in particular. In particular, he was the GM the CEO of GM as in general manager as well. And so this is back in the 40s, whereby he's working with a consultant, and he felt that the consultant maybe affected by the fact that he's talking to a CEO. He felt him like really worried about saying what's his conclusion are, and he's trying to compromise. We're all familiar with the word compromise. And basically what he said is really nice. He said, look, yeah, I'm paraphrasing here. Basically, every single executive in this organization knows how to compromise. However, they will not be able to compromise and get the right compromise until you tell these guys what right means. Meaning that when you're trying to make a decision, you don't try to think whether the rector will see it this way, the dean will be that, what's gonna be the impact. You first try to understand what is the right thing. And then, because you're not a robot, because you're not living on on planet on your own, because you need to be pragmatic, you start to make, changes to that decision to make it acceptable, to live in a culture that you're in, that actually be a more realistic, accepted, because eventually an action that is not accepted is gonna be a worthless one. Okay, so what I'm highlighting here, we're not going to spend too much time on that, is this notion of know what is right, then compromise, rather than from the beginning, letting pragmatism take the lead on what you're doing. Let me go back to an individual experience.
Victor, just take
sorry.
Can I interrupt you to ask questions, or you prefer to ask you the questions by the end of the part? Because
no,
there are
if
some
it's
questions.
clarifying, Fadi, please feel free. If it's going to take too much from the time, then I will, but don't worry about this, I manage.
Yes, Rima, you want to ask your question?
Yes, please. I want to ask, in the context of crisis, would you follow the same process? We have a time to have an information to make a decision? Because in the crisis, like COVID crisis, we have to do decision
Right.
always.
So I will say something very short on this, but I didn't still talk about what is the process itself. You will see the process is very broad, and the process itself, you can indeed use it independently whether you're in crisis or not. But I was going to say it a little bit later, but let me now answer it this way, and I will stay here and I will keep it here. And then if you want more discussion on this, I'm more than happy, Rima, at the end. People talk about intuition, right? And what is intuition is almost like if you want, a unconscious, robotized behavior that is proven almost, that is always linked to historical experience or events or outcomes. And it's proven in some experiments that intuition is best in times of war. So in other words, when you use intuition, if you overdo intuition, it's not a good thing, right? Most of the time, intuition is really just, your previous experience will basically unconsciously dictate that what you're calling intuition. However, in times of crisis, you don't have the luxury and the time, as you said, to actually go through a long process, and sometimes you need to trust your intuition. And it's proven to be, the right thing to do. Okay, I will keep it here, but you will see my actually process that I'm going to suggest in a couple of slides is actually quite broad, and it's not something that is, needs months to be implemented. As long as you're structuring your problem, it can actually be used even in times of crisis, I would say. Is that okay, Rima? Is it clear?
Yes, thank you.
But we'll clarify all this. It's still very, very high level.
Okay.
Justine, I think you had a question. Go ahead.
It's a bit related to the problem structuring. So the challenge here in what you've said is mainly proposing the right thing to do before getting to the decision. So the problem structuring and the process, exactly that's what I was thinking of in times of crisis and uncertainty and all of what we're going through. Do we have exactly the luxury to follow all the process and do the probabilities? And because we don't have the numbers, we cannot even simulate very much variables that are unknown.
Later, because I want us to talk about something that we're agreeing on, because for you process is one thing and for me maybe it's something else, and I didn't discuss it, so we might be talking about not the same thing. However, the question is very relevant, so let's leave it for a little bit later. Okay, so this is just to tell you that this was around 2010. I decided to leave New York and come back to Beirut. Crazy called me and had a job there and everything. And then, you know, we're deciding to get married, and, you know, I decided to also move to AUB. My wife tells me, you know, we maybe need to consider, my girlfriend back then, and then getting married in that same year, maybe buy an apartment. If you remember those years, this is 2010 times, I mean, prices were going to the roof. And one concern I had, I was not very much keen on buying, but, you know, one concern I had is that if I don't buy now, I might not be able to buy anymore. That's it, right? If the prices go up, you know, another 100% fold, then I'm not going to be able to, even if my salary grows, I'm not going to be able to catch up with that increase in the prices. So that was a concern in the back of my mind. So I said, fine. So I started looking. And then at some point I said, come on, like, you work on decision science, you basically do that for a living, and you didn't even take a pen and a paper and then thought about it. And then I sat and I basically said, okay, purchasing an apartment, what does it mean? The first thing that comes to mind is this: should I buy an apartment? Of course, the area, the budget and all that, but now I'm skipping the details, and live in that apartment. You say, oh, is there another option? Yes, but I didn't think about it first before I took the pen and the paper. The second option, should I buy an apartment and rent it? Actually, should I buy two small ones, one bedroom, and actually rent them? Because I love my apartment that I'm renting. Yeah, it's an old apartment in 60s with a view to the sea. You know, I love it, you know, and I maybe don't want to give it up that easily, right? But once you purchase an apartment, you're not gonna, it's gonna be hard. Then you can take that into account. Or should I just keep renting and forget about buying? Or should I wait, right? There's another option. And so there is this process, if you want to call it, but it's not going to take necessarily days or months, but it could as well, depending on the importance and, you know, the luxury of time that you might have or not, to actually go through. And I'm giving you here a piece, but I will link it to a process in a second. Okay. And so for every one of these options, I had to analyze, come up with some kind of value of that, and make my decision. And so what we're going to see here is a process, like we're saying, of sound decision making. We're going to focus on decision making under uncertainty, and really about understanding what uncertainty means, you know, because of time as well. I wish I can push that further. That's probably the part that I have a weakness for. And then I want to leave some time at the end to talk about some biases, because our mind can play us some bad games, right? Our mind, we're all humans, you know, from CEO to, you know, president to whoever, to a student, we all are human, and we actually can be affected in ways that we might not be aware of. So what are the building blocks of decision? One, it should be always driven by an objective, right? And of course, when you're buying a bag in a shopping mall, you don't necessarily, you know, the objective is to enjoy maybe, right? But you don't think too much about that. But when you're making important decision, you have an objective, right? So when you're buying an apartment, let's put what's the objective, right? And my wife and I didn't have the same objective at the beginning, and that was a problem, right? Because sometimes the objective is security. I don't want to be kicked out of my apartment. You know, we're going to have kids and so on, right? or the objective is financial. What is the objective? We need to actually lay it down. If we don't, we're going to miss the right decision, because right is not the most expensive, the cheapest, the best deal, the best located next to my mom. This is not the right, right? The right has to do with the objective. The objective is not defined, right is wrong. I hope I'm clear. Now that objective at the end is theoretical. It's written on a paper. What matters is the outcome, right? If your objective is to enjoy, you know, a luxury life in your own apartment, but that apartment end up actually having some serious troubles, you know, nash minhoni, and a, you know, a building built facing you, then your objective was correct. I will mention in a second that maybe your decision was even right, but the outcome ended up being bad, right? So what matters at the end is the outcome, right? The objective is chapeau, it's an umbrella, it's driver. What matters is the outcome. What affects the outcome, of course, is your decision, okay? But that decision and that outcome are affected by uncertainty. So in other words, let me give you a simplistic example. Remember those times where we used to drive, okay? So suppose I want to drive to enjoy, just relax. I like driving, okay? I go out of my party. I can turn right or left. I can go north or I can go south, all right? And I want to just enjoy the drive. Which one should I make? That's my decision, obviously. The objective is what to enjoy. What's the outcome? Is I will know it later. I cannot tell the outcome now. After the hour or two drive, I will see whether I enjoyed it or not. Now, what's the uncertainty? You know, at this time in general, there is no traffic north. Most likely there is more traffic south. But the uncertainty is that even though I took north, I might actually face traffic and would be a hell of a experience, or it would be the best experience. Now, that decision is impacted also by the constraint. What is the constraint? I have an hour. I don't have 6 hours. If I had 6 hours, I might reach Syria, and there it will be an amazing. But in between, you know, I don't have those 6 hours. So in 2 hours, what's the right decision? It's different than if I had 6 hours. Same thing with the apartment. If I have $2 million in cash, is one thing, and if I have a few $100,000 in cash sitting in a bank, is another thing. So I am constrained. I have uncertainty, and I need to make decisions. And these are building blocks for now. It's not a process yet, right? Let's step one step further. What makes a good decision? How do you measure that your decision is good? I'm pushing you to say this.
Meeting the objective.
That's the thing. So it's a tricky thing, right? And meeting the objective is indeed like, so should our results measure the quality of our decisions? Should our results measure the quality of our decisions? And I want to claim that that's a dangerous path to follow, to let only results measure the quality of the decision. You're happy that the result is good, but did you make the right decision at that time? Because you're going to make another one. Should I trust you, Mariana, for making the next decision? You did a decision today for me. I saw the result is good. Should I trust you next time? So let's think about this. I want to run a small poll. And so I'm going to think of a coin. This coin is unfair. You know, everything in Lebanon is. So our coin as well. 60% has head and 40% tail. Okay? And now how do I know that? I flipped that coin many, many times. And I noticed that 60% it reached head and 40% tail. And you know that. Okay, you might make a mistake on these calculations, but for now, I'm assuming this information is correct. And I'm going to play this game. You're going to pick one side, and I will toss the coin once. If you selected the side that match the outcome, you win $100. Let's call it fresh. And if you don't, then you pay me dinner. Okay, so let's run a poll on this. Very simple, I know.
We don't see the poll, Victor.
People are voting though.
Maybe not me because I'm a host. Okay, okay.
Okay, I still have 40% to go. We need to just do it as fast as possible, if you don't mind, just because I have other polls I want to run. But also, if you don't have the time to participate on one, it's okay. You will have the chance with others. Okay, I reached 70%, so I'm going to stop here. From the 70% of you who voted, indeed, most of you made the right decision. Let me share with you the result. And most of you did pick head. Now, why you picked tail? Because you like tail, or maybe I was not very clear on the description of the problem, and that's also a typical thing that happens in reality, where there's a mismatch between the problem and your understanding of it as a decision maker. Okay, that sounds like the right decision. All right. Now let me run another poll. So before I run it, suppose you got tail. It is possible, right? 40% actually chance you get tail, even though you picked head to be the right one. Did you make the right decision? What do you think? Anybody can jump in before I run the second poll.
Yes, of course.
Pauline, you made the right decision, right?
Yes, of course, because
right.
the risk was higher to get heads.
Right. Now go explain this to management sometimes. It's extremely hard, right? Management see tail and say, hey, blame you, Pauline. How come you didn't pick tail? And Pauline, I made it so easy for you. I give you only 2 options. It's not like you had 1,000 and you picked the wrong one. You picked head. Yeah, but I mean, I had my information, and based on my information, it sounded head was right. Right? There is a very difficult problem here in reality between a decision and an outcome, in particular, if the outcome is bad. Let's go to the second one. So suppose you got tail the first one, what would you select the second time around? And I want you to actually, as you're answering that poll, to start thinking in reality. How this result is going to affect your next decision. How much people are understanding what you're doing because they're only reducing their measure of your decision, of your work, of your job, by only the outcome. And of course, Machiavelli told us, and many people after, that what matters is the result. But again, I mean, if you end up firing me for making that decision of head, and you're going to get someone who's going to make tail, probably 60% of the time now, the answer is going to be wrong. While with me, 60% of the time, it will be right. But you fired me. Too bad for you. Okay. Some people change to tail. Can I hear actually, if you don't mind, again, no pressure whatsoever, but someone that moved to tail, from head to tail, can you describe to us why you did that? No? Okay. So probably nobody moved to tail. Maybe you stuck to tail. You had tail at the first time and you said, I want to continue, I want to be consistent. But I'm curious to know, if you feel like telling us, please jump in. Okay, let's just give it some thought. And indeed, this is telling us something that...
Excuse me.
Yes. Maroon, go ahead.
Dans les deux cas,
oui.
I have chosen tail.
Okay.
Because les données statistiques, c'est une question de 60%, mais finalement, n'enlève rien au caractère gambling in this sense, because your choice, even if it is between brackets, I will put it, it's scientific, but it's not, you know. And finally, all the companies are going to choose head, and il n'y a pas de rupture, and I will go into my insight in this sense. Comment je vais cultiver une certaine différence pour se distinguer sur le marché? Si tout le monde va opter pour head uniquement parce qu'il y a 20% de probabilité, on joue sur la probabilité ici.
Non, pas uniquement, vous allez voir.
Si moi je suis dans une situation of leadership, donc je vais faire face à une situation qui fait problème et je vais finalement retourner au-delà du gambling wise à une question d'insight. C'est pour ça que I was stubborn and I have chosen tails twice.
No, it's fine. And in fact, that's actually thanks to that, Maroon, you open an interesting discussion. So I actually, much more than you think, appreciate this stubbornness that you called it. I didn't call it. But let me say this, we did not only did it as based on probabilities, we actually did it with probabilities and outcome. En d'autres termes, ce que tu avais dit tout à l'heure, je me permets de te tutoyer, j'espère. En fait, l'idée c'est la suivante. When you are saying that there is a competition, for example, that means that the outcome is not necessarily $100 and a loss the other way. That means that if I pick head, and if everybody picks head, I might be losing, in fact. And in fact, if I might pick tail, even with 40%, I might actually win. Yeah, but that's not what the exercise said, because the exercise is much simpler than your more complex situation. So what I'm trying to say is that when you are in a more complex situation, you need to change those, adjust the situation as well, in the following sense, that this has to change as well. Here, I didn't tell you. So if you tell me indeed that, you know what, things are more complex, Victor. If everybody picks head, then it's not going to be 100. The 100 will be divided on everybody. So it's going to be 100, looks nice. Oops, sorry. But it's divided by 20, because now we're 20 that picked head. All right? So that is part of the exercise that I didn't know, Maroon, you knew. And so, of course, that your decision was based on a, to some extent, more complex situation. Am I making sense? Yet, what I'm talking remains right, I mean, remains valid in the following sense, that what you need is to just adjust these to take into account the reality you're in. And I did not only follow that independently. Is it clear? Now, on the philosophical part of which is judgmental, and I'll come back to it, so not to minimize of that, of this is gambling. Indeed, we can always think of a business as a gamble to some extent. We're really throwing dices always. Now the dices are easier. There is you know, an interesting example that, you know, there were a course on risk management, and they took them to a casino. You know, like for training, like similar to this one, and they took them to the casino because they thought that casino is a source of risk, and it was the most stupid actually thing to do, because casino is the least risk place to be. Why? Because in a casino you know exactly the odds. So, for example, I put my, you know, I bet on red, and I know that my probability of winning is exactly 49 points because of the zeros in the roulette. Right? But in reality, I bet on red and I don't know my probabilities exactly, right? So the reality is much more complex and more risky than a casino. And a casino actually end up being the easiest space in terms of risk, just because the probabilities are known. If you do the calculations right, you know those probabilities. If you are able to count, you're good at counting, you will know the probabilities. But in reality, you have information, and from that information, you hope that these numbers are correct, right? Of course, you can question these numbers as well. I'll keep it here, Maroon, but if you want to come back to that, we can a little bit later. Okay, clear? Good. All right, so should our result measure the quality? I'm going to go faster here. Results are often, to some extent, irrelevant. I'm putting the word irrelevant just to shock you a little bit. Of course, I care about the results. But if there is one shot thing, it's a one decision, then the outcome could be just because you were lucky, right? And if you do that decision again, you might be at this time have a bad outcome, and things will look bad because you didn't take into account, other factors, and other factors came up to be, sounds the right decision. That was not right. You are just lucky. However, just to be also fair, and I'm mentioning here whether bonus should be a good practice, right? Because bonus is driven by results. And so should we give bonus for the lucky ones? That's the question now. Now, yet I'm just to be also fair, what I call the law of large numbers. If the results are successively considered good, then probably something you're doing, right? Cannot be just luck after luck and chance after chance, right? However, this is a risky thing to drive our quality of decision making, right? Because if you realize later that in fact they were using the wrong coin or the wrong decision or the wrong process, then it's going to be too late. So of course the results matter, no doubt about it. But to measure the quality of the decision, we need to measure the quality of the process itself, rather than just focusing on the result. Okay. So, oops. So what's the decision-making process? I want to summarize it into 3 questions. I'm trying to make it as simplistic as possible. The word simplistic is even more simple than simple, right? Simplistic is too flexible, because that process that I'm suggesting, or framework, if you want to call it, has to be applied to the apartment situation, to the pricing situation, to the doctor situation. But of course, the time, the effort, the resources will change depending whether you're basically sitting in a room or increasing a tuition or basically recommending a particular treatment for a patient. The first question is, what are we trying to achieve? Basically the criteria, the goal, the objective. And that needs some time thinking about. We need to be understanding our strategy, for example. What's our strategy? Is it just today, for example, given let's talk about the vaccine? If our strategy to actually be in the news and be known that we are a good citizen in this space called Lebanon or the region in the healthcare system. If that's my objective, then my decision is going to be one thing. If my objective is profit, then my decision could be something else. If my decision is, my own healthcare system, I don't want them to actually take the risk, then my decision will be different. So taking the time on that is extremely important, and we don't do that in reality. My experience is that we jump into kind of already guessing some alternative or a decision. Sometimes we have the decision and we put it in a way so that do whatever is needed to make that decision before you even start thinking, right? You know the decision before you actually frame the problem, analyze it, and so on. That's very problematic, yet real. Secondly is, what can we feasibly do? What are the options, right? And this is the apartment example. Is it only just purchasing an apartment and living in it? Just don't go with the default thing, right? Map the alternatives. And then what do we have to watch out for? Every alternative has consequences, has implication. So for example, traveling north on the highway has implication, has its own uncertainty, has its own environment, has its own landscape, has its own issues. Traveling south is also another basically context, landscape, issues, and uncertainty. And so this watch out for is very important because it tells me the possible outcome that I might face. You know, traveling north will tell me, oh, it will be perfect, and it will be okay. Traveling south could be amazing, or it could be hell, right? The outcomes are basically understood when you push that watch out for a little bit further. So I'm going to summarize this into that triangle. The first one here, criteria, the alternatives, and the consequences. And for that to work, you need, of course, information. Right? You need information. And as I said, this is different than data, right? Getting data is one thing. We want to turn it into information. That's beyond the scope of today's discussion, but that's a very interesting discussion, in particular with respect to uncertainty. And then intuition. I'm putting it here. I'm committing that intuition is part of how we make decisions. And be careful with it. And my advice is that leave the intuition to the end. Write your intuition on a different piece of paper. And then compare your analysis solution, decision, with your intuition. And if it doesn't match, question your analysis. But if your analysis is right, between quotation, right, like Maroon said, you know, there's going to be some gambling, there's going to be some judgment, there's going to be some basically personal things. So my analysis cannot be perfect, period. That's fact of life. But if my analysis is right, given what I know, then my intuition was wrong. And intuition is smart because my intuition will learn from this and maybe will actually get upgraded next time and be able to actually lead me in the right way. So my process is extremely agile and lean. This is not a process of course, there is a recurrency, right? So you do that process consecutively and sequentially. You don't do it right from the first time. You notice that, oh, maybe we're missing an alternative here, guys. You don't like the answer. Mariana, vous considérez... Attendez, je n'ai pas le... Excusez-moi, un instant, j'ouvre le chat.
Oui, elle vous dit, vous considérez l'intuition comme faisant part des décisions, même si elle est subjective, parfois non basée sur l'évidence.
Exactement, c'est pour ça que I face it with. So, en fait, j'écris, ou ce que je suggérais, c'est d'écrire l'intuition quelque part, de la mettre de côté, et de faire l'analyse plus ou moins objective, mais même l'analyse objective, elle est subjective. Il n'y a rien de parfait. Hein, c'est pas un robot qui fait l'analyse. C'est des données, on ne sait pas si elles sont correctes, si elles sont biaisées, and so on and so forth. Et puis, on essaye de comparer notre intuition avec la solution de l'analyse. On essaye de comprendre, est-ce que c'est notre intuition qui nous a induit en erreur, ou bien c'est l'analyse qui a en fait manqué une étape ou des données, etc. Okay? But that's why I'm putting it here, yes. I think it is part. Okay? All right, so let me give you some examples. You are a doctor, how should you treat this patient based on a serious yet blurry symptoms? We used it so earlier, so I'm repeating myself, but I want to be critical here. So as a doctor, you're basically seeing these symptoms, and what are you going to say? You're going to say, you know, let me see if I can share with you here. Oops. Right? You should see my white screen. Tell me if you don't. And so I'm a doctor here. And I basically see these symptoms and I say, what's my criteria? What's my objective? And it could be, for example, depending on the patient and other things. Of course, I want to increase the, the health or maximize the health of this patient. But believe me, in some situation, that's not necessarily, it's not clear how you measure this. It could be, for example, increasing the life expectation of this patient. But in some situation, this is not the objective. It could be reducing the suffering and the pain. It could be multiple things, right? So we need to state it. It could be a weighted thing. It's not one or the other. All right. Then I basically ask myself, what are the possible alternatives? Surgery. And then we see what happens. We're gonna go there, check, see whether the symptoms, meet what we think that's happening, and then we take it from there. So there is an after surgery. Treatment. Right? Maybe there is suffering there, more. Do nothing, and maybe this is enjoy the couple of years remain, whatever the situation and how bad things is. I don't want to actually, move into a more gloomy example, but you got my point. What are the different alternatives that I have? Si vous voulez. Et puis, once I have each one, it's not, I need to ask myself, there is an uncertainty here. What's going to happen after the surgery? Right? I need to understand it. Same thing when I'm driving north. There's a chance I face traffic, or I don't. I could face bad weather, or I don't. Same thing with surgery. When I get in, what am I going to see? I need to understand that uncertainty. Same thing with the treatment, right? What's the chance that this person has this problem or the other problem? If he has this problem or she has, then this we might see this. But if he has this other problem, I might not see anything, and that would be great. And so on. And then for each one of these branch, I need to come up with a payoff, of course, subjective. Payoff is not dollars. I'm not going to pay this guy something. But in some sense, how much happy this patient will be as a result of that decision, or this one, or this one. And I need to come up with a score somehow. It could be purely subjective. I'm going to try to make it more objective a little bit later. But that score has to take into account everything that's going to happen if we go that road. If you take the plane and go to the US to do a surgery, it doesn't stop there. Your decision to take that plane has to do with what's happened next. And next. It cannot stop that. You know what? That's it. Let's go. Okay? If we go with treatment, we need to have a value, a score for that decision that takes into account what's going to happen next as well. Of course, things are very complex and you don't know what's going to happen next. That's why we were talking about probabilities. That's why we're going to talk about decision under uncertainty. Right? We need to face reality. And let me open a small bracket. And the video that you heard said it at some point. It was hiding. What I usually say to executives is not because you're dealing with uncertainty that you should not believe your analysis. Sometimes because things are not deterministic, exact, our mind doesn't like it, find it blurry, and feel like, yeah, but I mean, head, it could come tail. Then don't do analysis. Then follow your hug, your gut feeling and your intuition. No, that's a mistake. It's a mistake to reduce the fact that because things are complex, because a particular outcome will not happen with certainty, that I should follow my intuition. All right? We need to live with the fact that, the outcome might be different than the one we wished for, but we made the right decision. Because there are probabilities, because there are odds, right? That's not a reason to find excuses. Why are you blaming me? Anyway, we flipped a coin. No, I should blame you because you didn't measure the right probabilities. If you assume in the previous example, the coin was 50-50, just because you didn't take the time of flipping it multiple times to see that in fact it's not 50-50, it's 60-40. Then of course I have to blame you. Bien sûr, l'expérience joue un rôle, la question ou le commentaire, in measuring these, in understanding the payoff. As an expert doctor, I can tell you that if we do the surgery, we might actually find this with 80%. And so basically, my experience can help measuring the probabilities. It can help me measure the next decision I'm going to make as a result of my experience. A novice person will say, you know what, we're going to see later what's going to happen. I don't have enough experience to tell you. He's not going to tell you this or she's not going to tell you this, but they're thinking alone. No, I don't have enough experience to see, what could be the possible outcome of that surgery. Yeah. It's written, we do surgery in those cases, but what are the possible outcomes? Any questions, comments? No? All right. Let me go back to my slides.
Monsieur Victor, je voudrais poser une question.
Oui, s'il vous plaît, allez-y.
Comment se fait-il que lors d'une prise de décision en groupe, il y a des divergences dans le groupe? Est-ce que cela est dû à l'intuition?
Très bonne question. Il n'y a pas de, I don't have an emphasis today, donc je ne vais pas particulièrement me focaliser sur les décisions de groupe, mais vous allez voir dans le next slide comment en fait le process dont je suggère ici, qui est très basique, en fait aide à converger les différentes opinions. Mais en effet, la décision de groupe est très difficile parce que on voit la chose différemment. On a des incentives that are different. I'm a dean of engineering and talking to a dean of medical school. We don't have the same objective, right? So clearly, my objective, if the criteria is different, then we're not going to agree on the solution. That's number one. My experience is different. And so my experience is going to affect the possible alternatives I'm going to suggest. And so obviously, we're going to be harder here to actually, so you want to turn that, if you want weakness, into a strength by saying the fact that we are more diverse should allow us to actually think more broadly rather than, being more divisive. Of course, so easily said in a class like this than implemented in practice. Okay. But I'll say something right now on this once I'm able to move from this screen to this other screen. On the atypical movie, I will skip it, but basically the same idea. Should we produce it, sell it to a TV and so on, and try to measure the value of that? How much NBC will pay me for that movie? I need to estimate that number, maybe talk to some people there. If we distribute it as a B movie, B channels, right, with some number of movie theaters, or should we go, national, or should we go worldwide, right? And each one will have a different payoff. And so when we do that exercise, we basically are allowing a joint commitment in 3 steps. First, and this is back to the comment that was raised in a minute ago. First, we're driving an effective communication by asking questions, right? Remember in the previous slide, there were 3 questions. This didn't sound like a computer talking. This is really like, an internal decision maker, right? problem solver questions, right? Very constructive. By asking these three questions, criteria, alternatives, consequence, we drive an effective communication, right? We try to get the best out of each, their own experience. We don't drive intuition here. We drive, judgment maybe about possible alternatives. Data, we get data from different people. Then, more importantly, we developed a shared understanding of the problem rather than, let's do a quick Zoom meeting of 5 minutes. I mean, I have a whole, school to manage. I don't have time for that. It happens that we're on this committee together. Okay, let's have a 5 minutes. Did we have a shared understanding of the problem? Because my understanding of the problem was briefed by someone or an email I received, and I understood it in one way, and you're understanding it in a different way. I have my own objective, you have your own objective. I have my own incentives, and you have your own. Right? When we say this, we have a shared understanding of the problem. Fanny, may I ask you if there is a comment that you think is, maybe you can read it at some point if you feel, that comment is relevant, because sometimes I see a chat.
Of course. When I notice a comment or a question, I will be asking you the question immediately.
Okay, thanks, Fadi. And so the third one is, and that's the final one, we have a joint commitment. Not only we made a discussion and a shared understanding, but now we're saying this is the solution, and we take responsibility, and we commit to do that. Flying to the US to do a surgery, we're committing to the next action. What's going to happen after now, we already thought about it, and we committed to the next, right? We, increase the tuition, but the implication of tuition can be one, for example, drop in number of students joining, all right? In principle, that decision of increasing the tuition should have taken into account that scenario, and there's a commitment now that we're going to increase financial aid as a result of that to actually, increase that number of students again and make sure that nobody is left out by that increase. Okay, so simple, I would say simplistic framework and process, yet I think quite powerful. At least for me, it helps me a lot in structuring problems, making sure I'm analyzing. It doesn't give me an answer. It does not. That's the beauty of it. It just structures things. Okay? Categories of decision making. Probably it's obvious to you, but there are three. I'm not going to read all this. These are examples. But there always can be categorized into three types. Strategic decision, what I call tactical decision, and operational decision. How do you know the strategic? Multiple ways. Not because it's called strategic, but a lot of the time it's because it's a long-term one, very irreversible. Right? You're, basically deciding to become a, Turkish airline deciding to become a hub in the airline world. This is a strategic decision. You don't change your mind in 2 years or 3 years. They're building today the largest airport ever built in this world, out of Istanbul, right? You don't make that decision and then 2 years later you say, you know what, that was not a great one, let's actually close it down, right? It's an irreversible decision, right? You're going for, this particular career, right? Of course you can still change. I'm a big believer that, nothing is irreversible to some extent, yet it is quite strategic in many ways. Tactical decisions are more medium term, quite expensive to reverse. For, basically planning, allocating resources as a result of these plans, different pricing tactics, and so on, the layout of particular thing, the distribution system that you're following, and so on. These are tactical decisions, medium term, and quite expensive to reverse, yet you will revisit them, necessarily revisit them every now and then. And then short term, they're very short term, easy to reverse, and what we call operational decision. Extremely important sometimes, extremely important, but not as interesting from decision making, because in general these have laid down the setup for this operational one. And that's a good news in some sense, because what we're discussing here is about strategic and tactical, but a new feature appears here is uncertainty. When we're looking long-term and medium-term, by definition, what we're saying, I don't know what's going to happen. Operational is tomorrow, is in a week, in a few days. Uncertainty is lower, right? So when I'm talking about decision of uncertainty, I do have in mind, in particular, strategic and tactical decision. When I'm buying an apartment, it's certainly a strategic one. Okay, so that's the uncertainty just to be highlighted. We saw that before. I'm just highlighting that it's affect my decision and my outcome. So I'm gonna go slightly skip whatever is just obvious. Uncertainty was not under your control. How many applications will be receiving next fall? What will be the real estate market next year, and so on. I think it's obvious what uncertainty means. Go back to this, Robert Rubin. And this is the Harvard commencement. And just to, this is what also was in the video to some extent. There's no provable absolutes. But this was not an invitation to say, oh, it's not absolute. Then you know what? Better just not trusting what your analysis. Let me just follow my gut feeling. No, this is not what we're saying. At the opposite, because it's not proven absolute, what did he say? He said, we need structural, analytical decision-making, yet taking into account our judgment. Of course, there's going to be judgment, but we need to come up with probabilities. I know for most of you, let's face it, this is not something you typically do, come up with a number on probability. We need to do that extra effort. Because when you write down these probabilities, you will see that your decision might change. And until you write it down, it's still flu, it's still unclear, it's still foggy. And you might think, you know, if a coin with a 40-60 is a 50-50% coin in your mind. But when I, force you to write it down, yeah, indeed, head is a little bit more, it's 60% indeed. Right? Or maybe basically call for help, ask for more information, more data. Probabilities will force you to actually do your exercise more, in some sense, objectively, without, here claiming and hiding behind my finger that we suddenly become mathematicians. This is not the point. Right? So he talks about the complexity, each alternative possible outcome, right? The doctor checking every alternative, what's going to reach me. And then from day one, we said, from first slide, it's about trade-off. It's not going to be a beautiful life. It's not going to be, oh yeah, beautiful, no trade-off. Of course, flying to do the surgery in the US is extremely costly. And if you end up doing it, and end up being like actually a very mild thing when you did the surgery, then you're going to regret why you paid that flight and that hospital and so on, that the insurance doesn't cover. So there are always trade-offs. Shiraz.
Sorry, Victor, في Shiraz.
I know. I just told you.
Yes.
كأني عم بفهم كل ما عم نتقدم بالاكسبليكاسيون انه عم بعمل باراليل للي صار ببيروت بكات رؤوت. يعني في يكون الواحد يعتبر انه هيدي كيسز
هلا بركي يشيلوني من نعم
يعني عم بلاقي انه في كثير باراليل يعني كانه بهالكاي اللي صار هي قصه décision et non prise de décision et processus lourd et compliqué de la prise de décision. يعني
actually there is I mentioned earlier, Robert Rubin was a lawyer, but this is not a good example because he's an economist as well. But judges that are basically deciding need to actually also understand whether the decision-making process was right. They have their own decision-making, the judge. Am I looking at the different alternatives, the different decisions, what are the possible things, and so on and so forth. For example, I'm a judge, there's a divorce case in front of me, and I need to decide whether the children should have an exclusive, for example, how do you say, forgot the word, an exclusive, left with one parent rather than a partial, basically, collaborative relationship, right, with their parents. I need to, when I'm judging this, I have multiple alternatives. I will come back to your point, which is slightly different. Okay, and that is, for example, I have this option. I can judge this way. I can judge this way. I can judge this way, right? And every alternative, what's the impact on the kids? What's the impact on jurisdiction, and so on, and so on, right? On jurisprudence, and so on. So my decision has, as a judge, need to follow such process. Now, this is kind of a related point, but your point was slightly different. When I'm a judge, I need to also judge a decision making, right? Because if there is one basically simple crime with a criminal behind, it's an easy thing. However, when it's more foggy, then indeed, the judgment has to be about whether the decision was not done right? Did you indeed take the risk into account? Did you really take into account the implication of having such material in that container for some time? Did you investigate it? Did you know the probabilities that this thing might happen, and etc.? And when you think about risk, by the way, this small bracket, you don't only think about probabilities, because what's the probability that a material like this will actually take fire and explode? Let's face it, it's extremely low, extremely low. And so if you only look at probabilities, you will not actually take serious action. But when you multiply the probability by the impact that half of Beirut can be destroyed, then suddenly that same event becomes much more serious. So you don't only look at the probability without looking at the implication of that event that is rare. Am I making sense, Shiraz?
Yes.
Good. All right. I'm going to move on. I'm going to talk a little bit about risk and uncertainty. And I hope, so I had to pick what I want to share with you, but I'm a big fan of that example because I think it will be relevant to you. In the following sense, we all face uncertainties. The problem, uncertainty by definition makes us uncomfortable. And so a lot of the time, we reduce an uncertainty to a number, to one number. We get a forecast, right? We get an estimate, and then we bring it to the meeting. Okay, so this is called the flaws of averages. What's the flaws of averages is the following. Is this guy, check the sign. The sign says average depth 3 feet, so 1.5 meters. That's 1 meter, right? But on average, he must be fine going into that, right? Yet, he will actually drown in this thing because, in fact, it's very shallow here, and extremely deep here. And then reducing this to an average will actually not allow you to make the right decision. In fact, it will take you to the wrong decision. Okay? So Jihad was asking, what about analytical decision making? This is exactly what I'm talking is analytical decision. Okay, so basically what I'm not doing is pushing the analytical. That's all. All right? But the process of analytical decision making is exactly based on that same process, on these same questions, on these same probabilities, and so on. And I don't think I will have time, but I want to show you an example of how we could do an analytical one with probabilities as a result of that. But analytical decision making is beyond only decisions under uncertainty. It's also about optimization and simulation, and all that, however, is built on the same process. Okay. So let's do a small poll as well to understand the complexity of uncertainty. Suppose you have a hospital that has 160 beds. Okay. Average inpatient demand, what's inpatient demand? It's basically the average number of people that will show up in a day requiring a bed, requesting a bed, requiring a bed, is 150 on average. And let's say the average bill per day of a bed used is $100. The simple question, we always start simple, is Paul, where is the Paul? I don't know, maybe I don't have that question, but I have actually, no. Yeah, okay. So let's do it this way. What would be the expected revenue per day? So, right, so we have an average demand of 150 beds. Very simple, quickly answer. Everybody will be indeed putting the first one. Some people are putting others. Indeed. Okay. I'm curious. Probably they predicting
We have the CFO of the hospital. It's unfair.
It's unfair for me as well. Okay, so voting is stagnating. Okay. Let's reach. Okay, I'm going to run a couple of the others. Let's try to 62%. I'm stopping sharing the result. Indeed, I wanted you to give me the first number of 15K, but I also, there is something wrong with this figure indeed. And somehow the results show me this. Now, can someone that gave me another number than 15K tell me why you selected that quickly, if you don't mind?
Me and Rima, don't correct me if I'm wrong. No, Rima is the CFO. Okay. It's there's a variable missing that is the occupancy. And if we're at 100% occupancy, it's not the average demand. So if we're always 100% occupancy, we have 160 bed, we have 16K of revenue per day. So it depends on the occupancy, and I took the 100% occupancy.
But I was asking you for the expected revenue, right? So kind of the average revenue. But you will see, in fact, it's okay. Let's stop here. My comment, and then I will come back to you, Jocelyn, and to others. Okay. Now what I'm doing is this. Now I gave you only the average, right? What does mean the average? It means someone in IT tracked the number of people coming in and asking. For some people, they told them, sorry, we don't have a bed. For others, they accepted. For one day, we had indeed utilization below 100%. For others, full, and so on. So based on some more detailed data, I'm making it very simple for the sake of this in discussion, we realized that we can have two possible outcomes. Either one day we have low demand, or we have high demand. Right? We can assume that you cannot delay a high demand to the next day. Okay, that's it. Either you accept or reject. If I look at this demand of inpatients, their average is indeed 150. 80 times 50% plus 220 times 50%. And that's exactly the 150 you were given here. I didn't give you that. So I expected you to actually give me that with 115K. But now my question to you is, given this new information, what's going to be your measure of revenues? What do you think the expected revenue of the hospital with respect to beds, given that you have that new information? And voted. You need to take risk, guys. By the way, it's anonymous. So I cannot even tell who you are. So you're not taking any risk talking about uncertainty. I was going to divide you here in breakout rooms, but for the sake of time, I didn't, because it would have been nice to actually discuss that point together. If you have the chance after that, do that, because I think it's important to realize that uncertainty is complex to manage, to measure, to use, right? And let's see indeed. So I'm gonna, I want to reach 50% of the votes, if you don't mind. You know, a couple more courageous actions. Maroon, maybe you want to ask your question meanwhile. I'm waiting. If you don't mind, guys, just a couple of more to reach 50%, to have more a relevant number. Go ahead, Maroon.
Bon, je pourrais éventuellement attendre le résultat, mais moi, j'ai voté contre mes convictions. Parce que je vais vous dire pourquoi. Parce que j'ai voulu faire, à respecter la première consigne quand on a lancé le coins là, for head and
yes.
So I wanted to respect the figures wise. I wanted to behave in a figure wise. Mais je ne suis pas convaincu. Parce que moi, le hospital si moi j'ai 160 lits, je dois m'attendre à optimiser et dire que moi je m'attends à 160 lits. Donc, vous voyez, ça, c'est ma conviction. Mais j'ai voté en fonction des normes. Ce que vous avez donné comme chiffre. Vous voyez, donc, I'm trapped anyway.
Non, mais bien sûr. Mais le problème, c'est intéressant le point que vous suggérez là. Mais vous changez d'exercice. Dans le sens qu'il n'y a pas d'optimisation ici. La question est la suivante. On a déjà optimisé. Il y a une réalité. Et la réalité est que la demande pour ces beds, elle est des fois de 80, des fois de 220. Bien sûr, en réalité, ça va être pas uniquement de 80 et 220, ça peut être 65, 80, 110,
okay.
Etc., 250 peut-être, dépendant de la saison, des jours, etc. Okay? Mais là, je réduis la complexité à deux possible outcomes. Ça, c'est un fait. Aujourd'hui, vous me dites, oui, mais moi, je ne vous demande pas de prendre une décision ici. Moi, tout ce que je vous dis, c'est que votre management vous dit, c'est quoi votre financial performance given today situation? Vous voulez faire un planning. C'est quoi vos revenus? OK? Maintenant, vous me dites, oui, mais je ne suis pas content avec 150 beds en average, et surtout le 80, je veux avoir une utilisation larger, comme, let me end the polling with 51% share the results. So indeed, democracy doesn't win always. As you see in this example, the majority didn't have the right thing. And that's an interesting thing, right? Right is not democratic, right? And that's another session by itself. But it's not because the majority thinks one way that they're right, okay? That's very different than voting to elect someone, right? But, and even that voting might not be electing the right. And we know many examples of that. I will not, describe that part. My point is that, remember this, okay? But that's an example where the right answer is this, is 12K. And back to Maroon points. Maroon, what you're saying is correct. Now, if I want to use this to move to optimize, and you think that utilization of the beds is low and you want to increase it, then that's a decision-making indeed process, whereby I want to say, how am I going to do it? Is it through, between quotation, marketing it, between basically, having a new specialty in the hospital so that we actually can take advantage of the beds that we have, and so on, hiring more doctors, etc., right? So we can do multiple, and we started other process, but that was not the point. The point is to say, look, there is a fact. Tomorrow there's a meeting with the financial officer, right? And basically they're going to present us the revenues for next year. And as a result of that, we're going to decide maybe whether we hire, we optimize, and so on. And the decision, the estimation of 15K was wrong. Why? Because the IT guy that gave 150 beds on average was not incorrect. The problem is that he destroyed the uncertainty, replaced it by one number. And that is wrong. Let's see what is right. What is right is to say the following. And I will go to you, Rima. I think you had your hand up. 1 second, sorry. Okay. So what's the expected number of beds utilized? If you get to 80 people coming in, showing up, I'm gonna, oops. And so if 80 show up, you're gonna have beds for them, all of them, right? But that's gonna happen 50% of the time. The other 50%, you're gonna have 220. But when you're gonna have 220 showing up, what's gonna happen? You cannot meet everybody. So only 160 bed will be full, right? Because there are gonna be 60 rejected. So in fact, your average bed is not 150. That's the average demand. The average bed in terms of bed utilized is in fact much lower, is 120. And so your revenues is indeed 12K. And your error was not 2%, Maroon. Your error, not yours. Your error of thinking of 12, 15K rather than 12 is more than 20% error. That's gonna drive a wrong decision in optimization, hiring, and so on. That is problematic. If you don't understand uncertainty and account for it correctly, you're gonna make a wrong decision. Rima, you had a question, I think. Or
I had a comment.
Yes, please.
Eventually, with the first example, and I know the 15K is wrong, but usually this is where people get stuck in the first level of the decision while having the primary information and not digging through to get their decisions.
Right.
Or,
like talking about scenario based and so on, right? People try to reduce this to a number. Of course, you will tell me, come on, Victor, if it's 80 and 220, we will see it and we will realize that. Yes, but even if the numbers are not as simple, this is a simple exercise. Rima is right? We have tendency to reduce to a number, right? Suppose now you're gonna tell me, Victor, sorry, I need to go for a couple of minutes. Why a couple of minutes? You could have told me, Victor, look, I'm gonna go. It might take me 30 seconds. It could take me 20 minutes. I'm not sure. If I meet the dean on my way out, I might actually have to sit with him for 20 minutes before I come back. If I actually just, don't meet anybody, it's gonna really take 1 minute. You're not gonna go into that. You're gonna tell me I'm leaving for 2 minutes and come back. You reduce, simplified reality because you assumed wrongly many times that I don't care about that information. But that's not true. Because suppose I tell you, we're gonna wait for Rima to come back. But Rima told me 2 minutes. So I made that decision to make you all wait because I thought she's gonna come back in 2 minutes. But suddenly she comes back 20 minutes later. She didn't mean it badly. Everything she's picked, the average, the most likely outcome, she said, most likely I'm not gonna meet anybody. I'll be back in 2 minutes. But she knew that there's small chance she's gonna meet someone. And if she meets this person, it's gonna take 20 minutes. And she should have told me because I'm making decisions based on her information. You agree, Rima?
100%. Thank you.
All right, cool. Good. I need to manage time and I have a few things to tell you. Okay, let me tell you a long story short. This is D'Espagna, one of my favorite. So Fadi mentioned I'm a faculty at New York. I was a full-time there before I come back. And I still go there every year, even now with the lockdown. And my favorite place, spot is called D'Espagna. If you go there, keep it in mind. It's, I like to call myself an expert in sense of finding cheap yet very good places. And that's one of them. So basically it's a tapas place, very small, incredibly good. And, even my wife is actually jealous of Yelp because now I don't go to a restaurant unless Yelp agrees. Yelp is an app that tells me some, kind of Zomatos or something here that tells me about some rating about that restaurant, right? And she told me like, oh, you used to be like, you like to a free spirit, you go experience, now you're stuck to Yelp. If Yelp agrees, you go. And she's to some extent right. And I was wondering one day whether, someone that looks at this 4.5 score, which is an average number, okay? That's an average. There's a flaw there because there's a lot of information hiding on us. For example, Mariana, it could be that all these are students. And today I don't have the same taste than most of the students. I have a more elaborated one, supposedly and hopefully with time, or different taste because of different background and so on, right? It could be, for example, that this 4.5 is this is because when it started in 2016, it was excellent, but in the last year it's bad. But then on average, it looks good. And I'm not saying today in the world of big data, me, Victor Aramen, is going to just get stuck with a number. This is where I realized that no, in fact, it was hiding. They had a box called details here. And when you click on that details, you see something like this. In fact, it tells you the probabilities. It tells you the historical behavior. And it tells you that, the distribution means that most people are put at 5 and 4. So to make it more living example, suppose you want to take someone for dinner, and this someone loves food. And suppose that if you don't pick the right restaurant, the guy will not talk to you again, will not do business with you again. Period. What's the risk I'm taking by taking this guy to this restaurant? If you pick your decision based only on this number, you might take much bigger risk than you think. That sounds very good score. It is a very good score. But let's look at risk. What does it mean that this guy is going to like the restaurant? It means that this guy is going to score either 5 or 4 after the dinner. So he goes back to his room, hotel room, he checks Yelp, and he says, that's my rating. If he put 1, 2, or 3, you're in bad shape, guys. If you put 4 or 5, you're in good shape. And now the question becomes, what's the risk you're taking? Which means, what's the probability he's going to actually pick 4 or 5? Of course, he might be very different than all the people that scored that restaurant before. But my judgment is that he's not that different. So he could put any of these 5. My probability is going to be, I have 538 reviews in total. Oops. So the probability that the risk I'm taking is these 3, right? So this is 50, 27 plus 13 plus 10. This is 50 votes. So 50 divided by 538, which is the total vote, give me 10%. Yes, 9%. Excellent, Rima. And so basically, you didn't see that 9% coming. I mean, let's face it. If that is so important business deal you're going to sign in that restaurant, believe me, I will go to a better restaurant, to a different one. If this is one date out of 10 that you're going to go to, then probably she's not going to leave you for that restaurant, hopefully. But we are assessing in an analytical way probabilities and linking them to a payoff, which is losing a business or a customer or a patient or a student. All right. I love this game, but I'm going to have to skip it. I'm going to skip it. So it's called the Monty Hall Paradox. If you're interested, check it out. It's online. And it's just about more probabilities and so on. So I'll skip it. If we go back to the movie distribution, this is a small, a slight kind of a quick answer to Jihad's point earlier. I'll just cover it in 2 minutes before I leave a few minutes to the psychological part of decision making.
Oui, Victor, je voulais juste te proposer si on peut dépasser les exemples pour aller vers, comme tu as dit, les processus de prise de décision. Et comment tu as dit qu'on va parler quand on va dépasser la probabilité et prendre en considération l'ensemble des facteurs, la complexité.
Okay. Now, I mean, let me take this example still. I will just cover it in 2 minutes because someone was asking about the analytical.
Okay.
And then I'll leave a few minutes for what I think you meant. Okay. So basically, what I want to show you is the distribution of the movie. We identified 3 alternatives: selling TV, distributing as B feature, and distributing as A feature. Then we say, okay, if I distribute as A feature, what's going to happen? I'm going to look at the consequence of that. If this is a box office success, then there's going to be great news. But if it's a box office flop, that's going to be a really bad news because distributing as an A feature is very costly, a huge marketing, a huge cost. Of course, I could have multiple branches here, moderate success. If I distribute as B feature and it is successful, what's going to happen? And if it's a box office flop, what's going to happen? This is called a decision tree. Right? And then finally, I can sell to a TV network. And there's no uncertainty because I don't take any risk. Canal Plus will take that risk, and that's it. I don't need to worry about it. Sometimes Canal Plus is part of the production, but can only buy it also afterwards. Once I do that, then I follow every possible scenario I identify, and I come up with a score. That 32 is thrown on you, of course, but in reality, you need to do what? Your cost, your benefit, analyze. There's no probabilities here. No probabilities in that calculation, period. What you're doing here, if I distribute as an A feature, and if, maybe it's unlikely, but if we are lucky and it's very successful, what's the bingo? What's the good news? Then you follow another one. If we distribute as high and then it's a flop, then we're going to lose a lot of money. And if we distribute as B feature, same thing. You get different numbers. That's what we call the payoff matrix. For every possible scenario you have, right? You follow a path. And then you move to probability. And then you say, how likely it's going to be a success? Now you go, analyze, judgment, you ask for experts, you read, and so on. You get data, and you come up with probability. Okay? 70%, 40% if it's a B feature, right? The probability of success is different because the audience is different. So, there's a smaller chance we're going to be happy here or make the customers happy. The bigger chance to actually have smaller chance to have a flop because it's an atypical movie. And then for the TV, there's nothing to do for probabilities. Once you have your probabilities, what you're saying is this: what's the score for this A feature? The score for this A feature is going to be the average score if things go well and if things go bad. So it's a weighted average of the two. Okay? 30% times 32, 70% times the minus 10. That's going to give me a $2.6 million if I go with distribute A. This 2.6 is taking into account the uncertainty, the probabilities, and the outcome of each. Same here, 3. And the network is offering me 5. And now I'm ready to decide. I'll pick this one. Of course, you might be a risk taker and pick this one as well. That's more than fine. But that's for a different discussion. Okay? So this is basically translating what we discussed to a decision tree, linking them to probabilities. However, bad decision can be extremely costly. And bad decision can come from the activities we assigned in the process. There is one process, Fadi. That's it, one process. And the activities of the process were defined as setting the criteria, identifying the alternatives, and getting the information, right? And following for the to come up with a consequence. And the error, the bad decision, will be coming from one of these, has to be. Either your criteria was wrong, your alternatives were missing or incomplete, or your information is wrong, and so on. So Maroon, I'll take your question at the end if you don't mind, just because of the sake of time. Huh? Sorry about this. And so where do these bad decisions come from? They come from our hazy mind. Our mind, il peut nous jouer des mauvais tours. Point. Why? Because we use heuristics. If you're driving a car, right, you go faster if you feel that the car in front of you is further away. How do you know she's further away? Because you don't feel it in it. You don't see it well. If you don't see the car in front of you well, that's because the distance is long. So you assume that distance is equivalent to how well you're seeing. But maybe you forgot to put your glasses. Bish. Or it's foggier than you thought. The heuristic will not work. Pilots will not use their, eyes only. They have a more scientific way to measure distance. They cannot rely on only pilots' eyes because the cost is much bigger. And so these heuristics are subject to our political, sorry, not political, but psychological traps. Let me ask you a couple of polls that are fun, and I finish on this. I hope you will give me that time. So my first poll is anchoring. You're in charge of designing the wine list of a friend's restaurant, and she wants her patrons to purchase primarily the more expensive wines. To achieve her goal, how would you arrange the wine listing? Alphabetically, by price, least expensive first, by price, most expensive first, or randomly? Be careful to the criteria. So democracy sometimes wins. Still have 35% of the votes, maybe 42, 46. I'll stop at 50. Come on, guys. Yes, majority wins. As I show you the result, let me give you another example. I did it at INSEAD not long ago. I had a class of 80 students, and I divide this class into two parts. I asked them two simple questions, complex. I said, randomly selected the people in the class in 40-40. And I said, do you think the number of countries part of the United Nations is larger than 35? 2, can you guess the number of countries part of the United Nations? The second set of people, I asked them almost the same thing. I said, do you think the number of countries part of the United Nations is larger than, smaller than 1,000? B, can you guess the number of countries part of the UN? Guess what happened? What is the obvious thing happens is that when I took all their answers, it was a course called How to Lie with Statistics. I took the first category. I took the average of their answers. I took the second category of students. These are supposed to be smart people, INSEAD, MBAs, a lot of experience. I took the second category, and I took their average answers. What did I get? Anybody can guess quickly? I got a number first, much smaller than the second number. Though people that guessed the number of countries part of the UN gave me a smaller number when I told them larger or smaller than 35. Then those that actually I asked them the first question, is it larger or smaller than 1,000? We get anchored, okay? Anchoring is one of the most important bias we all face, no matter how charismatic, strong, or forceful we are in our opinion. We're gonna be anchored by others. The first person to talk in a meeting will anchor us. And so our judgment will be affected. And in fact, the answer was the most expensive first. Because suddenly the second will look cheaper, much cheaper. And the third also. So basically people will start picking on the top of the list. You might have a different, idea for that, and I'm happy to hear it at the end. The point is to say that we are anchored. What about listing possible donation? Same, notice it. We always go from up down rather than small to high. What about negotiation? Right? You always want to start the negotiation by throwing a number that is low. You should do that because you're anchoring the room with that number. Of course, they'll try to negotiate a higher number, but you already framed it. And when we're measuring probabilities, how to link it to our discussion earlier? When I'm trying to come up with 40, 60 as probability, I need to make sure that I'm not biased by something. So I need to unbias myself. Otherwise, my own analysis is to be thrown out. What causes more death in developed countries, homicide or suicide? Where is it? Probably you will get it right. Yes, you're quite informed people, as I expected. On purpose, I put a picture of a homicide. I'm trying. Why? Because I wanted to anchor you. And why people are anchored by homicide? Indeed, suicide is much higher, as you said. But people don't know necessarily that. And they get anchored by the news. In the news, we hear about suicide, sorry, about homicide, not about suicide. We might think that actually there's much more.
You booby-trapped us with the icon you chose.
Right.
You booby-trapped us.
That's what I said. I put the picture on purpose as well. Yeah. But you didn't fall in my trap, indeed. And we need to be careful with this. Now, tell me, how should we be careful, Victor, about this? You need to be first aware of it, right? Are we really scientifically measuring that probability, that outcome, that payoff? Or are we basically going by what's on our mind? This is called availability trap. Why availability trap? Because what's in our mind is the news, is last year, right? And then we forget that, in fact, there is more complex situation that we're dealing with. The list of anchoring, I'm not going to allow myself to delay you more, but it's long. And I didn't have in mind anyway to cover all of it. Framing is important. If you tell someone this treatment has 90% chance of saving your life, he might accept it. If you tell the same patient this treatment has 10% chance of failure and resulting in your death, that same patient will actually reject that treatment, even though it's the same treatment and the same sentence. It's just framed differently. And that's why, for example, in organ transplant, for example, donations, people say, you know, if you don't want to donate your organ, opt out, not opt in, right? Because if you opt out, most people will not opt out. If you tell them to opt in, most people will not opt in. So framing the question is extremely important in decision making. That's helping our analytical decision making. It's extremely feeding into it, and not to minimize just because these are, you know, more psychological impacted basically features. Okay. Overconfidence. Doctors, I'm sorry from doctors, but they're overconfident. Data show that most of the time they're not as precise as what they think. When they tell you you have 50% chance to have pneumonia, most likely you have only 20%. I don't blame only doctors. Most scientific people are overconfident. Really overconfident, meaning that I estimate the probabilities wrongly. I'm too confident with myself. Entrepreneurs are too confident that they're going to succeed, not because they're basically faking it, not because they're ethically bad, because they're genuinely overconfident and genuinely believe their chances of succeeding is higher than it is. And if you're an investor, you cannot just follow their, their enthusiasm. You have to step back, analyze, get the facts right. I'm stopping the end of the beginning. I'm calling it the end of the beginning as a conclusion because I'm hoping, there's a lot of seeds here to push further. This is just a, kind of a small taste of analytical decision making to some extent. But what we discussed quickly in this today's discussion is decision requires responses, not reactions, especially important ones. Even in times of crisis, as much as possible. That was a question earlier. As much as possible. Decision-making process to face the complexities because it allows you to actually dissect it. C'est quoi dissecter, right? And then try to understand it rather than having a blurry mind, right? Confusing things like we will all do no matter how smart we are. Criteria, alternatives, consequences. Of course, relying on information is key and intuition is a good thing. We focus on strategic and tactical decision under uncertainty. So we ask ourselves how bad that, we reduce uncertainty to a number, to an average, and it can be very bad, right? Flaws of the average. Okay. The Yelp example, risk. When you're measuring risk, you need distributions. You cannot just look at a score of 4.5, right? You're taking 10% risk that was hiding in the numbers. So you need to, dig deeper to understand it and be aware of traps. There are multiple traps. I discussed anchoring, availability, framing, overconfidence, and there are many more. Number one, basically, medicine against those traps is awareness. Number one, but also the process that I mentioned can help you in that. All right, I'm going to stop here. I'm more than happy to stay longer, by the way, more than happy, but I know some of you would have other commitments, so I want to make sure to finish not more than minutes late.
Thank you so much, Victor. So maybe we can stop sharing the screen to take like for 2-3 minutes to discuss with the colleagues. Irena a envoyé sur le chat le post-test, donc c'est le même questionnaire pratiquement qu'on vous demande de compléter, ça vous prend 2-3 minutes. Un grand merci, Victor. It was really very interesting. And we can do many links with other training sessions on the Ignatian spirituality. Dans la spiritualité ignatienne, on parle beaucoup de discernement dans la prise de décision, de réflexion, d'analyse. Donc, il y a beaucoup de liens dans ça. Donc, un grand merci. Et j'espère que ce ne sera pas la dernière fois qu'on
ce sera avec plaisir, en tout cas.
De rencontre. Je vous demande d'ouvrir vos caméras, si c'est possible, juste pour 1 minute et de poser 1 ou 2 questions, si vous en avez encore, Dr. Victor, before we end the session.
Let me give priorities, if you don't mind. Une priorité pour ceux qui doivent partir. Et puis ceux qui ont un peu plus de temps, peut-être.
On peut rester quelques minutes ensemble. Donc, si vous ouvrez vos caméras, ça sera génial. Comme ça, on prend d'abord une photo, souvenir pour nos social media, et puis on peut discuter ensemble. Donc, qui a des questions au niveau du processus de prise de décision, au niveau de la question de la probabilité qui a été évoquée, de tous les éléments que Victor a présentés et qui sont passionnants. Donc, qui a une question, qui aurait une question, vous pouvez la poser en anglais, en français, en arabe. La langue n'est pas une barrière pour nous.
Mais je voudrais poser une question, s'il vous plaît.
Oui, Maroun. Oui, Maroun.
OK. Moi, j'ai bien gobé votre approche, mais juste un tout petit bémol qui est subjectif. Ça me concerne à moi. Moi, le mot-clé ou le mot, comment dirais-je, le levier, pas le levier, my concern, c'est le mot prospective, n'est pas la perspective. Et dans la prospective, il y a ce qu'on appelle dans la théorie du scénario une rupture par rapport à la norme, à la probabilité. On est dans l'écart type au niveau de la décision. On n'est pas dans ce que vous avez essayé de défendre. Vous voyez, et c'est ce qui fait toute la différence.
Attendez, je vais essayer de mieux comprendre. Vous pouvez me donner un exemple? Est-ce que vous me parlez de un peu l'équivalent de Blacks, des outcomes qu'on ne peut pas prédire?
Non seulement ça, non, il faut les prédire au niveau de la prospective, dans la théorie du jeu. Je parle d'un problème géostratégique, par exemple. Il y a ce qu'on appelle la longue histoire et tout le monde va se baser sur la longue histoire éventuellement. Par exemple, si je dis on va confronter une baisse dans la démographie. Ça, c'est la longue histoire, vous voyez. Mais quelqu'un qui, d'un jour au lendemain, il projette une idée, par exemple, une pandémie qui va, par exemple, décimer la démographie. Ça, ce n'est pas dans la longue histoire. Vous voyez, je viens avec une rupture. C'est le mot.
J'essaie de relier ça à ce que je dis pour le reste.
Oui,
et puis,
oui. Alors, par rapport à votre...
excusez-moi, ce que je crois que vous voulez me dire, c'est que les probabilités que j'ai mis, par exemple, sur l'écran, elles, peut-être, viennent de l'histoire et non pas... Non, pardon.
Non, ce que vous avez mis est juste. C'est la tendance, ce qu'on appelle la tendance, la tendency, et la longue histoire et une observation diachronique, synchronique de tous les systèmes, je veux bien. Mais il y a une discipline qui est au niveau de la rupture, la prospective, vous voyez. Donc, ce n'est pas la longue histoire avec le développement naturel des choses. Je dois confronter un aléa, d'où on a évoqué le crisis management à un moment donné, comme par exemple la question de la pandémie. D'un jour au lendemain, je peux avoir, par exemple, je peux faire maintenant une perspective, par exemple, qu'en 2030, les voitures seront électriques. Mais prospectivement wise, je peux dire qu'avec la pandémie, on a replacé l'homme et la climatologie au centre des choses. En 2 ans, tout le monde va opter pour la voiture électrique. Vous voyez, c'est ce genre de rupture qui n'obéissent plus à la courbe moyenne.
Mais prenons votre exemple. Maroun, prenons votre exemple. Very exciting one, by the way. Prenons votre exemple. Et vous me dites, par exemple, je ne sais pas c'est quoi la décision, ça peut être allocation de ressources, mais relié à la voiture comment vous l'avez appelé électrique. Ah, ok, je croyais que vous allez robot, ok, on va dire électrique. Dans ce cas-là, c'est un peu plus simple aussi, parce qu'elle existe déjà. Donc, on va dire, la question vraiment, c'est une décision qui a à voir avec le fait de combien de personnes, combien de personnes vont adopter ce véhicule comme leur moyen primaire de transport. Okay? Et donc, vous me dites que l'histoire ne peut pas nous aider dans cet effort d'essayer de prédire ce qui va se passer. Okay? Parce qu'il y a d'autres possibilités qui peuvent arriver. En effet, donc par exemple, une pandémie peut arriver et cette pandémie peut accélérer ce process.
Okay.
Ça, c'est une alternative. Une branch of the uncertainty, parce que c'est possible que cette pandémie n'arrive pas, ou elle n'est pas aussi importante qu'on va le croire.
Non, mais on est en plein.
L'autre, oui, bien sûr, mais je veux dire pour un truc qu'on ne connaît pas.
Okay.
Parce que c'est dans le futur, je suppose que vous parlez. Et puis, un autre truc, c'est que, par exemple, si elle ne vient pas, ou il y a autre chose qui arrive, c'est que je ne sais pas, il y a un climate change qui est drastically changed, et là, c'est plus une question de démocratie, mais plutôt de regulation, et voilà, ça va être imposé, et d'un coup, il nous faut construire ces trucs-là, et si on ne s'est pas préparé, ben, on va en fait pas pouvoir gérer ça. Ou d'autres alternatives. Mais maintenant, exactement ces points que tu me... L'histoire ne m'aide pas, en effet, à les mesurer. Et ça, il faut que j'en suis conscient. Et donc, anchoring should not be basically a trap, because history is an anchoring. Okay? Last year, basically, only 2 million people bought electric cars. Has nothing to do with this exercise, as you're asking me, because tomorrow is different story.
Yes.
And now we ask ourselves, what's the probability of a pandemic? Now you tell me, I don't know, we have very few pandemics, Spanish flu, now the thing, I don't know what's the probability. Fine. Now we're going to put a probability that are taken into account that we don't know much. Right? So what we're saying is that we cannot be precise in our probabilities because that will be a mistake.
Okay.
Okay? And that, if you want what you call confidence interval in statistics, should be larger. Because our probabilities number estimates, we're not sure about them. This is about too much in the future, and we don't have help from the history. Okay? That analysis can still continue. It's more, if you want, I don't want to call it vague, but it's more subtle, and it's less precise because of that, because of its nature. But I still think it's relevant. Okay? Because this approach that I'm preaching to some extent is not forcing you to use history to come up necessarily with a number that has to be very precise. It's actually flexible to take into account the fact that you are indeed sometimes facing, extremely, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the outcome that is going to happen, you could have predicted, right? That's by definition, because, you're basically thinking in a futuristic setting, right? But it allows you to see, to view, to think about the alternatives, and then to come up with multiple solutions. And again, you will pick the one that you feel more comfortable with now that you that kind of like went through that analysis. Okay. And by no means, I don't think I ever mentioned, but I know that this is the typical thing to do, that history drives my numbers, right? Indeed, when I took a coin, I did say, I'm going to flip it many times to see whether I get head or tail, 60% and 40%. But if I give you now a coin, you don't know what's going to be 60-40. What are you going to use? You're going to use your judgment, 50-50. It might be wrong, but that's your judgment. If I give you a coin now and you don't have the time to flip it to know whether it's 60-40, you're going to go with your best, guess, which is 50-50, which is wrong. But you don't have that luxury to come up with 60-40. But again, that makes it even more exciting. And by no means what I'm talking here is that, replace, everything that about more risky, more futuristic, replace it by what we know. And so at the opposite to some extent, I actually will be more on your side in a sense that I think this is even more relevant when we're trying to think about things that are very complex in my mind, but it will not look as a simple exercise as the one I showed.
Merci beaucoup, Dr. Ar-Rahman. Je ne vais pas vous retarder, ni à vous, ni aux collègues. Merci beaucoup pour cette rencontre passionnante.
I'm fine. There is another question.
Merci beaucoup. Et j'espère qu'on aura d'autres rencontres, parce que là, c'est une initiation à ce processus de prise de décision très complexe et très, très intéressant. Merci à chacune, à chacun de vous. Et si éventuellement vous avez d'autres questions, d'autres souhaits, vous pouvez nous envoyer des mails. Je les communiquerai à Dr. Ar-Rahman et à la prochaine, Inch'Allah. Bonne semaine.
À la prochaine. Au revoir. Bye bye. Stay safe.
Merci. Merci beaucoup.